Good evening, and welcome to the League of Women Voters Voter Forum for the 40th and 42nd Legislative Districts. My name is Kay Ingram. I am co-president of the League of Women Voters of Bellingham and Whatcom County. Please stand with me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Founded in 1920, the League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan organization with 800 affiliates across the country. It encourages informed and active participation in government, works to increase understanding of major public policy issues, and influences public policy through education and advocacy. Membership is open to men and women of all ages. There are membership applications in the lobby, and I hope you will consider joining the League this evening. The voter forums are presented by the League of Women Voters of Bellingham and Whatcom County and the City of Bellingham. The city has provided the facilities, and the forum is being televised live by BTV 10. Also, the forums will be repeated on BTV 10, which is Channel 10 on Comcast, and they can also be found on demand on the city's website, cob.org, and on two of our low-powered radio stations, KMRE and KAVZ. The Bellingham Herald is our media partner, and we thank all of these partners for their generous support, and if you have the opportunity, we hope that you will thank them as well. The forums are the property of the League of Women Voters of Bellingham and Whatcom County and the City of Bellingham. They may not be used in any manner without specific written permission from both parties. This is the second of 4 forums that we'll be hosting this election season. The link to the schedules of other forums can be found on our website, lwbellinghamwhatcom.org, or they're on hard copy in the lobby. One note of clarification regarding tonight's forum. The League contacted all candidates appearing on the general election ballot for the races in the 40th and the 42nd legislative districts. 2 candidates are listed for position 1 in the 40th district, Christine Linton and Brandon Robinson. When contacted, Mr. Robinson confirmed that he withdrew his name before the primary. However, because he received write-in votes during the primary, his name appears on the ballot. But because he has withdrawn his candidacy, Representative Linton will be the only candidate speaking this evening in the position 1 40th district segment. We ask our audience to be respectful, please no applauding of your candidates, and we want as much time as possible for the debate. In addition, please do not communicate orally or visually with any of the candidates, and of course, please turn off your cell phones. Tonight, as I've mentioned, we have candidates from the 40th and the 42nd legislative districts, and we thank them for their participation. And now I'd like to introduce our moderator, former League President and current board member, Tanya Baumgart. Tanya?
Thank you so much, Kay, and good evening, everyone. Before we get started, it is important that we all understand the ground rules for the forum. All of the candidates have been contacted and given the opportunity to participate in this forum. If they were unable to participate, they were given the option to provide us a statement to be read on their behalf. The beginning questions were written by the forum committee. The candidates have not read the questions. We'd like to encourage the audience to ask questions as well. Questions for the candidates should be written on the provided index cards and passed to the ushers that are available to collect them. Ushers, could you please raise your hands? There's one over there. Please address your questions to both candidates, and also please note the race or at least one of the candidates' names so that we know that your question will be asked at the appropriate time. All questions will be pre-screened by League members Jane Frudenberger, Joe Collins, and Dan White. This is to avoid duplication and to ensure legibility. We will fit in as many questions as time allows. Candidates will have 2 minutes for their opening statements. Margaret will be tracking the time. Margaret, can you raise your hand? And Jeanette will flash a yellow sign when there's 15 seconds left and a red sign to signal stop. If the candidate continues to talk past that point, a bell will be rung. This means enough already, quit talking. For all of the other questions and for their closing statements, candidates will have a 1-minute response time. We ask that the candidates are respectful of the time allotted due to the limited amount of time that we have. In our contested races, candidates were asked to roll the dice to determine the order of start and finish. The high roller was able to choose whether to share their opening statement first or last. If they chose first, they will have the last closing statement, and vice versa. Tonight, we will cover the state legislative races for the 40th and 42nd districts for the 4 state representative races and 1 state Senate race. A representative's term is 2 years. The House is made up of 98 members, 2 from each legislative district in the state. The total membership of the House is up for election each even-numbered year. During legislative sessions, the legislature is called upon to enact or reject legislation affecting public policy in the state, provide for the levy and collection of taxes and other revenue to support state government and assist local government, and appropriate funds for these purposes. The salary is $42,106 annually. The first candidate we will hear from this evening is running unopposed for 40th District, Washington State Representative, Position 1. Christine Litton, Democrat. Thank you so much for being with us this evening.
Yeah, thank you everyone for joining me this evening. I know it's a beautiful evening outside, so thank you for coming. And thank you to the League of Women Voters for inviting me. I appreciate this opportunity to get to talk to everyone, particularly since I'm unopposed. So a little bit about myself. I'm Christine Litton again, and I'm the state representative for the 40th District, serving the good people of San Juan Island, part of Skagit, and Whatcom counties. And I actually was raised on a farm in Illinois and met and married my husband Mike when we both worked at Shell, the Shell refinery outside of St. Louis. And we actually wanted to come back here to raise our children. He's a cougar and wanted to get back here with his family, and I wanted just to recognize my in-laws are actually here tonight, Don and Fane Litton, who live here in Bellingham. My husband was born in Bellingham, so for us this is like coming home, and it's been a great place to raise our 2 boys. Both our boys are in college now, and as of a week and a half ago, we are empty nesters, and we are really quite thrilled about it. So I thought it would be a hard transition, but it's going pretty well. So my first term in the legislature has been really productive. I've been happy with the things I've been able to work on. I have been happy with my colleagues. I've been impressed with really what goes on in Olympia in terms of the expertise that the staff can help us to really look at productive legislation that will help our districts. Everything we do, we try to really draw back to how does it benefit my district and how does it benefit the state of Washington as a whole. I am lucky to be able to serve as Vice Chair of the House Education Committee. I'm on the Ag and Natural Resources Committee and the Capital Budget Committee. I chose those committees to be on because I wanted to look at what our district represented and what could I bring to the table as in respect to that. And happy to have 2 great seatmates, and we try to diversify the areas that we work on to serve the 40th District as good as we can. So the time that I've spent it's just been a year and a half actually, in the legislature, I've been trying to spend a lot of time getting to know my district. And I guess I'm done, so I'll take questions now, but thank you.
Thank you, candidate Litton. Your first question, you'll have a 1-minute response time for it. You voted for House Bill 2127, authorizing supplemental appropriations which balance the state budget. What impacts, either good or bad, do you believe that this budget will have? How will that affect how you approach the budget in the next 2 years? 1 minute.
So each biennium, and actually at all times, we have to have a balanced budget in the state of Washington. And this reaffirmed that, and we look at each, unfortunately, more times than not, because as revenues come in, we have shortfalls with our budget, so we have to rebalance that at all times. So the legislation that we passed actually just gives us that mechanism to make sure that we prioritize what we want in the budget, how we're going to fund it, and looking at the big picture of really looking at the sustainability of a budget. Thank you.
Thank
Sorry.
you. Your next question. The state Supreme Court has ruled that Washington is not meeting its constitutional responsibility to fully fund public education. How do you define fully funded, and how would you achieve this?
I am so glad you asked me that question. As many of you know, education is why I went to Olympia. I was on the school board elected twice to the school board, and really was looking at, what programs do we set in place? What does basic education look like? How are we going to fund it to make sure our kids are successful? Educated population is our best defense against failure. I've also been chosen and serving on the Governor's Task Force for Education Funding. We've been meeting for the last month and a half of really looking at what does that basic education mean? What is the dollar amount associated with it, and how are we going to pay for that? It's a bipartisan, bicameral committee, so we are actually delving into that. It's going to take a combination of efficiencies in our government. It's going to take a combination of revenue. It's going to take a combination of a lot of things. We estimate that we're probably about $1 billion short in the next biennium of fulfilling that paramount duty.
You're so good. I don't really crack the whip. Okay, thank you. Your next question is, there is truth across the entire political spectrum. Please give an example of when you learned something from across the aisle with a smile face.
With a smiley face. So the reality of when we're in Olympia, 90% of the things, maybe more, that we work in a very bipartisan way. The bills that we sponsor, the bills that I've sponsored, we prime sponsor it, we get to sign on the first dotted line. The second dotted line, we really lurk across the aisle to see who we can work with to get that bipartisan support. And the diversity of opinion in the decision-making process is what we've set up in the state of Washington with a democratic republic process of the diversity of the opinion. It is very hard to pass policy in our state. It was set up that way, so we have to work with each other. You never hear of the 90% or 95% of the things that we work well together on. You only hear about those things that we have controversy about. So the truth of the matter is we work very well together, and I look forward to working with all of my colleagues. That's how we get good policy passed.
Thank you, Candidate Litton. The next question, what is your stand on coal exporting through Puget Sound, Cherry Point, Gateway Pacific?
I suspected you might ask that question. So I have been spending a lot of time over the last 2 years reading a lot of emails from my constituents in my district. We get hundreds of emails about this. For me, ultimately, when we look at our state, when we just passed legislation to convert our coal-fired plant off of natural gas because we knew the impacts, that is what I'm going to look at. I do not believe that should be a single commodity, and for me, coal is off the table. I think that is a mechanism for, it's a true competitive disadvantage for us. It's like shipping jobs overseas for me. We're giving cheap energy to two countries we can't compete with now, and it's actually the whole Far East. So for me, it's a matter of jobs for my kids and the next generation.
Thank you. And your next question. Do you support covering more citizens with Medicaid services as federal funding becomes available through the Affordable Care Act in 2014?
Actually, yes, I do. So last week I helped host an event at the hospital. Eileen Cody, who's our chair of our Health and Human Services committee, came down to help us understand of implementing that Affordable Care Act nationwide. We have thousands and thousands of people who are waiting to get on our Medicaid program. So yes, I do.
Thank you. What will you do to protect Washington State's excellent system for citizens needing long-term services and supports, in-home care, family caregiver support, etc.?
That has come up both years I've been down there. So we are in a very tight budget. And again, we have an interesting development in our state. I have not lived here my whole life, but I've seen a transition over the years where we still have a high demand for services. We want a great place where we can live, work, and play. We want a compassionate society that takes care of those who cannot take care of themselves. Do we need a system to help people get back to work, get their jobs, take care of their health care? I worry in particular with the next generation, our children in our schools. As we make budget decisions, how are we going to fund the things that we believe are important? And I have to tell you, every single thing that we try to cut out of the budget, we get hundreds of emails from people of how it personally impacts them.
Thank you. What can Washington State do better to prepare our communities for the age wave, the large increase in seniors as baby boomers come of age?
Well, unfortunately, I'm falling in that category, or fortunately too. And that's what we're seeing in a lot of our communities, and that kind of goes back to, the services that we have in our state, our demand for jobs, how do we prepare people for the jobs of the future, and our senior citizens play a huge role in our communities and making them better. We need to make sure that we have communities that support their network, their amenities that we want in our communities, for their lifestyle. And our parents and grandparents have provided a great life for us, and we need to do the same.
Thank you. What, if any, changes do you think should be made in the State Environmental Protection Act or its regulations? Please explain your thinking.
We get a lot of comments, and some of them are rhetoric that, too much regulation, it's too hard for people to do business. And we have spent a great deal of time, and I spend a great deal of my time going around trying to understand exactly what that means for people. Because our environment is something that we need to protect for the next generation. There is no doubt about that. But we also need to set up a system where people can enjoy that, live, work, and play in a great state. So our environmental protections, and I have to tell you, my good seatmate, the senator, this is his mild, deep topic, and we collaborate a lot on that, and I look to him for a lot of advice on that.
Thank you. Many ways have been suggested to maintain current state facilities, such as parks and highways, by charging admission or tolls. Do you agree or disagree with this approach, and is there anything you'd do differently?
We try every single year to look at that. As we have revenue shortfalls, we have to look at other ways to pay for the services that people want and expect. Our parks are a great example of that, and the senator again worked on great bills that will help us maintain our parks, keep them running, and we actually have to look at that. With regard to infrastructure, we actually funded for my community of Anacortes. It's in the islands also. It's really important for us to maintain the ferry system. That's part of our infrastructure, our highway system in the state. We actually passed legislation. It was a fee on your driver's license to some of the driver's license to help pay for that, and we actually secured funding for the next 144-car ferry and trying to maintain service for that, because that is a huge economic base for the islands, for Anacortes, and along the I-5 corridor.
Thank you. Clearly, educational issues rank highly on your priority list. Other than that issue, what are your top 3 priorities for legislation during the next 2 years? My focus has stayed very strong from 2 years ago when I ran. I wanted to run for a strong education system. I wanted to run for thriving economy in our communities, and I wanted to have an environment that we all trust and share. And I will continue to work on that. One area that I'm actually branching out on, in my mind anyway, is I'm working with higher ed. We have great facilities up here with Western,
and with our technical colleges, and working with those and making sure that we have a system, a continuum of service for our kids from early learning to K-12 to higher ed, working on some things in the marine industry area to make sure that we have keep the economy thriving in our communities with boat building and stuff.
Thank you. At the end of your 2-year term, what would you like your constituents to see as your most significant accomplishment?
My most significant accomplishment was the ability to really integrate outside of the community that I lived in Anacortes, of loving it, to actually loving all the communities that I serve, of spending a great deal of time out in the communities trying to understand how businesses thrive, how the ag community thrives, what people want, what their hopes are for the future. And I think that's the biggest accomplishment for me, is getting that broader perspective. And it is a big geographic area from the islands all the way up to Bellingham, and really trying to understand what works for people, what doesn't work for people, and trying to balance the needs with our budget to what the demand for services are in the community.
Thank you. Last year, voters approved the privatization of liquor sales in Washington. Are there any other revenue-producing state services or programs that you believe should or could be privatized? Why or why not?
You know, I am always willing to look at public-private partnerships. There are some issues with economy of scale. There are some issues with the state in terms of being able to provide that service for not the margin of profit that some of the private industries do. So I will be always very, very cautious. If a lot of those were available, they would be coming forward. I would be bringing them forward, and I'm always going to look at that. I think there are great ways for us to provide public-private partnerships. I do not believe in totally privatizing everything, no. I think our government, when well-run, serves its people. When it's not serving the people, the balance, the pendulum swings back to center, and we adjust it. I believe that we really work hard to have great communities, and I believe our government works.
Thank you, Candidate Litton. We are now done with our question and answer, but we would love to hear your 1-minute closing statement.
So 1 minute is not very much, and I feel like the Lone Ranger up here with nobody else up here, so looking forward to see what other people have to say. But I am honored to serve you. I love the people I serve. I love people. I love the intensity of this job. I love the policy wonkiness of it. I'm not too crazy about the hours that we put in, but I am pleased to serve the good people of the 40th District. I'm looking forward to going back and continuing my work on education. I have just a deep passion for children and for public education, and I'm looking forward to going back and serving with my colleagues and trying to improve this great state we live in. Thank you, everybody.
Could you please join me in thanking Candidate Christine Litton? Thank you so much for running for public office. Now we'll have a little transition here as we shuffle people around. And I just want to remind you that we are doing another representatives race, and their term is 2 years, and their annual salary is $42,106. Our next race is for the 40th District Washington State Representative, Position 2. And the candidates running are Jeff Morris, Democrat, and Howard A. Pellett, Green Party. Thank you both for being here tonight. Now, I understand, Candidate Pellett, you threw the high roll on the dice. So my question for you is, would you like to do the first opening statement or the last opening statement?
The last, please.
All right. So we will start with you, Candidate Morris. You have 2 minutes for your opening statement.
Great. Thank you very much. Thanks for putting on this forum here tonight. My name is Jeff Morris. I'm the representative from the 40th District, Position 2. I've had the privilege of serving in Olympia the last 2 years as a citizen legislator, which I've enjoyed a great deal. It's a real privilege to represent this district. The district's unique in that It's one that has allowed me to work on very technical and complex issues that has weighed the value of the work more than the ability to generate press releases. I like to say it's better to be a workhorse than a show horse. And this district has rewarded that type of activity. I grew up in Guaymas Island. I'm actually fourth generation from Guaymas Island down by Anacortes. I'm one of the few small business owners in the Democratic caucus in the House of Representatives. I work in the energy sector, and that's also been one of the areas I specialize in Olympia. I'm very proud of the work we've done over the last decade, passing many policies that I've been the lead on to make Washington State one of the top 10 clean energy states out of all 50 U.S. states. That type of work, again, is one that needs constant gardening and tilling because there's a lot of competition to be at the top of that list from states like Massachusetts, California, Texas, believe it or not, a leading wind producing state. I've also been a leader on privacy and technology issues. An RFID law we passed a few years ago was the first in the nation, has become the standard for U.S. corporations to follow as far as protecting your privacy with radio frequency identification technology and tracking your shopping habits. Those are all issues that takes tons of time and effort to get to the true path of what's going to keep technology commercially viable but protect your individual rights. I'm known as being fiercely independent down in Olympia. It's something I'm quite proud of. I look at each issue as it comes along and weighs it on its merits. I love hearing from all of you and getting the mosaic of opinions across the 40th Legislative District because usually there's conventional wisdom somewhere between those differing opinions, and I look forward to your questions here tonight.
Thank you. Candidate Pellet, your opening statement, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you. And despite the name here, my name is Howard. So if you're looking for my name on the ballot, it's not George.
Oh.
I would like to talk about an issue that troubles me, and I think it should bother you as well, and that is that the incumbent state representative received nearly 90% of his political contributions from corporations in 2011. These political contributions included $400 from Pacific International Terminals, Inc., one of the coal terminal applicants. I accept political contributions from human beings only and limit those political contributions to $100 per individual. The incumbent received political contributions of $800 from Philip Morris in 2011. Who would you trust to deal impartially with smoking issues? The politicians that takes $800 from Philip Morris, or the man that limits his contributions to $100 and from human beings? The incumbent received contributions of $5,700 from healthcare and pharmaceutical corporations during 2011. Who would you trust to deal impartially with healthcare issues? The politician who takes money from healthcare and pharmaceutical corporations, or would you trust the man who limits contributions to human beings and $100 each? Decide for yourself. Look at the facts and then you decide. Can you trust the politician that takes money from special interest, or will you trust the man who limits contributions to human beings in the amount of $100? Thank you.
Thank you, Candidate Pellet. We will start with our first question, and that is, what is your philosophy of the role of government, and how would that be reflected in your decisions on the budget? And the first person to answer would be Candidate Morris.
Thank you. Well, the scope and role of government is something we should constantly be examining. And the measuring stick I use is government in a role to either be a safety net for someone from actually costing us collectively as a community more in taxpayer money and resources? Are we doing things that are going to help them succeed in their own purpose that they found in their life? Or is it to help people succeed commercially? We build roads not only to visit our neighbors down the road in the other parts of the 40th District, but also to transport commerce across it and make commerce happen. I think we always have to look at the value that government's providing versus what can be done or is not being done in the private sector, and there's not a pat formula for that. It's something you have to apply your heart and mind to and look at each situation as it presents itself as what's best for taxpayers.
Thank you. Candidate Pellet?
I think at this point I'd have to say I need to learn a lot from my fellow legislators, and probably that will influence the development of my philosophy. But I like to think that the main feature that I have is the ability to be fair and the ability to be open-minded. And so I don't have a rigid philosophy on any particular issue dealing with government. But again, I would hope to be fair, and I definitely would be open-minded. And I would listen to all the evidence, and then I would make my decision accordingly. Thank you.
Thank you, Candidate Pellet. We are going to start this next question with you, Candidate Pellet, so that you have an opportunity to answer first as well. The next question is, what factors should be considered when addressing the challenges of economic development and environmental protection?
That's a good question. I think that, of course, we need to protect the environment. Everybody agrees with that, at least they say they agree. I really do think it's critical that we protect the environment, and I think that there are ways to develop the economy and build jobs and that sort of thing, and still do that within the confines of a good environment. Clean energy, for one thing, is something that I think has not had enough support from state government. And I think it's an area where there are a lot of jobs, a lot of growth, and a lot of income. So thank you.
Thank you. Candidate Morris, your response, please.
Could you repeat the question, please?
Oh, yes. It is, sorry, I was so ahead of myself. What factors should be considered when addressing the challenges of economic development and environmental protection?
Thanks. Well, there's always some presumption in that question that the two ideals are always mutually exclusive, which I don't find to be the case. I find they're mutually beneficial most of the time, and there's lots of examples we've had here in this area that as far as state policy to carry that out. One example here locally is the work that Senator Ranker and Kevin Vanderweg that I participated on the last few years in funding a year-round rescue tug out near the entry point for the Strait of Juan de Fuca. That was a good example where there was state government funding for a while because it was important to protect the pristine coastline and all the tourism, economic development value that happens around our natural environment we have here in Washington State. In working through that issue, the private sector finally stepped forward, and 95% of the marine industry agreed to pay a fee to actually pay for a year-round rescue tug. They saw it in their economic best interest to environmentally protect the risks of their own cargoes from soiling our shores here in Washington State. You can find win-win solutions to make this a beautiful place to both work and play and live, and I don't find that they are mutually exclusive ideals.
Thank you. As you probably know, many local people are very concerned about the possibility of having North America's largest coal terminal in Whatcom County. What is your position on this project? We will start with you, Candidate Pellet.
I'm glad you asked that question because I've got an answer. Thus far, I'm opposed. I've looked at a lot of the issues. I'm very up on the issues, I think, and I'm opposed. I'm opposed for a couple of different reasons. Number one, I'm pretty sure that the environmental impact statement will not deal with some of the major issues that need to be addressed. The major issue, the elephant in the room, is global warming or global climate change. We're talking about over 100 million tons of coal that will be burned annually in coal-fired plants in Asia. And I'd like to see a study of how much contribution that would make to global warming. Also, I'm worried about the further jobs that will go offshore due to the cheap energy that will be sent offshore. Thank you.
Thank you. And now, Candidate Morris, would you like to
Thank you for the question as well. And like Representative Litton, I've heard from people from Friday Harbor to Bellingham to Mount Vernon and Burlington all concerned about the issue of the coal export terminal up near Cherry Point. The same arguments happening to many ports across the Pacific. For the first time, there's demand across the Pacific for China that's justified building those ports. I'm opposed to the facility up at Cherry Point. I could probably give you 20 minutes about the reasons why, but I'll try to do it in a drive-by way here. The reality is that there's a certain open window now economically where it makes sense economically to haul coal to Cherry Point. That's only during an economic recession or depression. As soon as the economy is on an upswing, there's too much demand, I think, for container traffic up and down this corridor here, and we'd be left with a stranded asset that could only handle one type of bulk commodity. I think it's also rather stupid to fiddle away a huge natural resource that's not renewable when there's cleaner technologies that we might be able to utilize it domestically in the next 20 to 40 years. So why give it away when we can use it here ourselves, given the right technology over time?
Thank you. This is a great follow-up to that. In your view, what energy sources would receive top priority for support from the legislature and why? And we will start with you, candidate Morris.
Great, well thank you, and again I could probably spend 30 minutes on this, but as I mentioned in my opening, the work we've done the last 10 years have made us one of the top clean energy states, and because we're out in the front of that pack, we're seeing some issues here that are becoming emerging issues that are happening nowhere else because of the development we've had in the wind sector in the state and because of our hydro resource that we have here as well. There's a Rolls-Royce study from 2001 that basically said that 80% of the jobs in the new energy technology sector are going to be in the SCADA systems or the software systems to make all these different generation resources work together in the grid in a harmonious way. And we're seeing some of those jobs developed here now. Things like energy storage. I'm actually hosting an energy storage meeting in Portland on Monday with the region's utilities and regulators and energy storage technology developers to try to figure out how we can store, like we do now, we have storage with hydro, they're called dams, store the volatility with renewable resources so that it's dependable, reliable power 24/7.
Thank you, candidate Morris. Candidate Pellet, your response, please?
Would you repeat the question, please?
Absolutely. In your view, what energy sources would receive top priority for support from the legislature and why?
Well, in my opinion, I think that the top priority should be to alternative energy sources. We've been fiddling around too long, kind of ignoring the elephant in the room, global climate change, and we're going to pay a price someday if we don't play catch up. I look at some of the countries, Europe and others, that have done a tremendous job of building alternative energy facilities, and they do it through local credits and so forth, massive credits in some cases. Germany, I believe, has a credit of 30% for alternative energy. So I think that that's where we need to put our money for our own sake.
Thank you, candidate Pellet. Next, what, if any, changes do you think should be made in the State Environmental Protection Act or its regulations? Please explain your thinking. Candidate Morris, could you please start us off on that one?
Well, thanks. I'm not an expert in the SEPA Act, and like Representative Litton might defer to Senator Ranker, being a former county commissioner, he's dealt with it more than we have in actually issuing those type of permits. I deal with it in the energy sector in our state permitting process, and there's a balance between, that question we had before about environmental protection versus allowing, projects that are legitimate and fit within the zoning go forward and compensating for the land loss that happens for certain environments. The thing we need to do is make sure the process works. The criticism I've heard sometimes is about how some of the mechanisms with the decision making on the consultants who are hired to actually do those environmental studies. I have some concern that the number of people in that field is getting more narrow, and there maybe needs to be more diversity in that area, so there's a wider range of people doing that type of work. But the biggest thing is to make sure that it's not too costly to pursue for your average person.
Thank you. Candidate Pellet?
Well, I'm sort of reluctant to jump in and say let's make a lot of changes until I know more about it, but more about the issue. Certainly, I would approach any proposed changes with, I hope, an open mind and a fair process. Frankly, I think that there are some abusive situations that have arisen through overly zealous regulators and so forth, and I think that those folks need to be weeded out. My office would always be open to people with that have issues with some regulations. So, thank you.
Thank you. All right, the next question is, does the state have a responsibility to provide a public safety net for its most vulnerable populations during good and bad economic times? Please provide specific examples of your priorities for state funding in this area. And we are going to start with you, Candidate Pellet.
Thank you. Yes, I think that there is an obligation to provide a safety net, and yes, I do think that we need to protect our most vulnerable. I attended a forum a while back involving a group of caregivers and parents and friends of people that were just horribly disabled, some mentally, some physically. And, those people want to work, they want to contribute to society, and we should do whatever we can to enable them to contribute. So, yes, and by the way, I listened to some surprising testimony from Republicans that agreed that we need to provide for our most vulnerable. Thank you.
Thank you. Candidate Morris?
Thank you. Well, there's been an untold number of extremely tough decisions about every one of the safety net programs we've had over the last 4 years of our budget crisis. We've had an unprecedented change in the scope and role of state government in the history of our state. I believe not the biennium we're going into, but the past biennium was the first time in our state's history that we had less state money than the previous biennium. Even during the Depression, that didn't happen. And we literally were triaging, as we were trying to put this budget together every day, making decisions about, we're going to cut this program that probably provides the life for 1,000 people, because this program over here actually helps 10,000 people. They're the type of things that really yank your heart out. I think here locally, the Area Council on Aging, with our aging population, has had some cuts and programs that help home assistance, let people stay in their home longer as opposed to going into convalescent care. Those types of programs, I think we need to invest in first, because they save tax dollar money in the long run.
Thank you. Do you support covering more citizens with Medicaid services as federal funding becomes available through the Affordable Care Act in 2014? And we will start with Candidate Pellet, please.
Yes.
Simple and...
Yeah, my answer would be yes, too.
Okay.
That throw you off?
It did. It did. I didn't have any time to do my little markings. All right. Let's go ahead and get started on the next one. Would you please state and explain your position on Initiative 1240, which establishes public charter schools, 40 public charter schools in the state of Washington? Now, I'd like to start with Candidate Morris, please.
Well, thanks for the question. This particular initiative I don't support on charter schools. I think my former seatmate, Representative Quall, was an advocate for a particular type of charter school that has proven to be particularly effective in inner city regions. And I think the real value of the charter schools is that it's a way to actually get parents to reinvest in the schools with their own time. And that's so key to, I think, having successful students, is having parents participate in that school system. But we can do that now, and the reality is that we don't have enough money today to fund what it would be a basic modern day level of education. We have to probably raise $5 to $7 billion between now and 2018 to fund that modern day definition of what an adequate basic education is, and diverting some of that money off onto a program. The proposal as it stands is one that I don't think is wise at this time.
Thank you. Candidate Pellet?
I also oppose charter schools. There's a whole raft of problems with them. They tend to cherry pick the good students from the public school system and leave the less gifted students behind, requiring more care and more teacher involvement and so forth. So I think that I'd like to say that I've raised 5 sons in the public school system, and I've been very, very pleased with the results. I mean, I can't say my sons are geniuses or anything, but they all did pretty well in school. And we had one kid that was frankly trouble with dyslexia, and the officials in the school recognized that and dealt with that in a way that I felt was very, very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Other than meeting the constitutional mandate for fully funding education, what are your top 3 priorities for legislative action in the next 2 years, and why? And we'll start with candidate Morris, please.
Thank you. Well, this isn't like in a 1, 2, 3 order, but my top 3. I think the first the first 2 would be the most critical to the 40th district. I think the 40% cuts that higher education have taken over the last 4 years during these budget cuts is the equivalent of cutting your sales force right before you come out of a recession. You know, we had 8,000 to 9,000 jobs in the science and technology area that our state created last year, and over 6,000 of those jobs were filled by workers from out of state and offshore because we're not producing the folks here that can fill those positions that we're creating with our economic development policies. So restoring higher ed funding, making college affordable, and not just for the 4-year universities, but from the technical colleges all the way through. Continual training is how we're going to be economically competitive. I've got 10 seconds to get my other 2 in. Sustainable ferry funding is crucial for this district, as well as transportation funding will be a big issue in the next legislature. And I very much want to continue my work to be a leading state in clean energy technologies and renewable energy.
Thank you. Candidate Pellet?
Well, I think that there's a basic problem, and that is that there's a group of legislators that say no to any tax increase whatsoever. And I think that as long as that's the case, we're going to continue to face these shortages of needed funding in schools. So, what I would like to see, and I don't know exactly how this would happen, but I would like to see an outreach to the public, an educational program, as it were, to convince the public of the need for school funding. And I think if we can convince the public that there's a need, I think that the change in the legislature will occur down the road. Thank you.
Thank you. What will you do to protect Washington State's excellent system for citizens needing long-term services and supports, like in-home care, family caregiver support, etc.? And we are going to start with candidate Pellet.
I haven't the faintest idea what that question means or how I would go about it, but I do support that. I do support in-home care. I do support all of those services and long-term services. But it all boils down to funding, and we're still faced with the same obstinate people that will not vote for any tax increase. So until we can change people's minds about the need for funding, we're not going to change the system. Thank you.
Thank you. Candidate Morris, please.
Yeah, I've already previously stated this would be a priority of mine in restoring services in the social area of the budget. Specifically, there are some other things that aren't necessarily financial, and it was fortuitous. Actually, I had some meetings on this today with the Area Council on Aging to talk about it and to educate me on the problem. But there was an initiative that passed a few years ago that requires an additional 75 hours of training for these people to give in-home care. And that's become a huge barrier because what the initiative prescripted is not working. It's not getting the numbers through the program. You have to take all this training and take a test. If you fail the test, you can't work any longer in providing someone in-home care. There's a huge problem apparently with people who English is a second language. Over 60% of them are failing this test. So we're creating a self-imposed shortage of workers at a time we have more elderly people needing the services than ever. So I think going back and reforming that system a little bit to make sure there's quality training that actually gets people trained and certified is a big way to improve that program in particular.
Thank you. A large number of our health problems are due to bad choices, smoking, alcohol, overeating, lack of exercise, risky sex. Is there anything that you think might be done about this as a legislature? And we will start with candidate Pellet, please.
Wow. Yeah, there are. I believe that 80% of our health problems are created by our own actions or inactions. How to convince people to eat vegetables and salads and that sort of thing. I mean, everybody tells me that they love salad, they eat it, but if you go to restaurants, you can watch people kind of push the salad off to the side of their plate and eat the meat and potatoes and gravy. So, yeah, how do you get through to them? I mean, they can see the consequences of their actions. The same thing with cigarettes. I had a friend on the island that smoked heavily cigarettes, and now he's got lung cancer. And he told me the other day, he says, "Howard, I suppose you're going to tell me I told you so." Well, no. He's a friend. I wouldn't do that to him, but I did tell him so.
Thank you. Candidate Morris?
Well, I mean, we have what they call the sin taxes, which are taxes on most of the things you prescribed, I think, except for risky sex. We don't currently tax. But the reality is that government has put a higher cost on those items because they are a free choice you make, but they're also one that costs us collectively. When people have huge health needs towards the middle to end part of their life, and the rest of us pay for that when someone shows up in an emergency room, it costs us all, which is why we have those types of taxes. I suggested a few years ago when there was a debate going on about the candy tax and so forth, that we actually just look at taxing sugar, because really it's sugar that is at the basis for a lot of the long-term health ailments that have cost us the most, particularly with late onset diabetes in particular. And we're the only country that regularly puts tons of sugar in our bread and our cereal and so forth, but I think we do tax those things. And we've done them in a way that still lets people make freedoms of choice, because you have the right to vote and not vote, and in this state you have the right to actually choose to end your life if you want to do that. But at the same time, when they cost us all collectively, we have put a higher cost on those choices.
Thank you. The next question is, would you support scrapping the Growth Management Act? Why or why not? And we will start with candidate Morris.
I wouldn't scrap the Growth Management Act. I think it's, in some cases, has proven to be working somewhat well. I know there's been a lot of frustration in the development community about it. I have some particular frustrations with it that I can go on ad nauseum at times in the energy sector. Part of the problem we have today with bringing new renewable energy technologies on the line is trying to get transmission to areas that had never had transmission before because no one wanted to develop renewable resources. Well, in the Growth Management Act, counties and cities were supposed to identify corridors in those plans to put new infrastructure to accommodate the growth, and no county or city has done that, and no one really understands how that whole business works, so there's been no pressure to go to court and get people to comply. So I think there's places like that as we continue to grow. Since I've been in office, we've gone from being the 17th largest state to the 13th largest state, just passing Massachusetts in size. And I think the growth management planning has done that in an organized way so we don't have sprawl like they have in Riverside down in California.
Thank you. Candidate Pellet?
Yeah, the way I understand the Growth Management Act, and I was involved in it at the first, based on an organization that I belong to, Friends of Skagit County. My understanding of it is that the purpose for the Growth Management Act is to require cities to identify urban growth areas, and that they would not allow developers to get out, miles and miles away from the city center where there are no services, and the taxpayers would then get stuck with the cost of the services. So, it was designed in a way to be a friend of the taxpayer. No, I would not scrap the Growth Management Act. Again, I would listen. If there's complaints about it, I would be happy to listen to the issues and act if it's appropriate.
Thank you. We are now done with our questioning portion, and we will conclude with our closing statements. Candidates, we are going to begin Each of your closing statements should be 1 minute long, and we're going to begin with candidate Pellet, please.
Okay, the pellet campaign is dedicated to the people and to listening to and representing your interests. I think that it's pretty clear how I feel about political contributions. I limit them to $100. I have to tell you, sometimes it's painful. You know, I would dearly love to receive those $500 and $800, $400 checks, but you know, I just feel that it's wrong to do that. So I contribute my own money to the campaign, and I hit the streets with I badger friends. I think that the issue is clean government, and so I don't want to appear like I'm in the pocket of special interests.
Thank you. And candidate Morris, please.
Thank you. Well, this is the area that we differ on quite adamantly. This is the third time that the challenge has run against me for this position. So at this point, I'm just accepting he doesn't like me since we don't have many policy position differences. The reality is that I have over 10,000 recorded votes. I think it's the lowest form of public discourse to use innuendo and accusation without linking it up to specific actions. Inherently, my opponent has said up front that money influences the way he votes, so he has to limit his contributions to $100. There isn't any amount of money that influences the way I vote. When people who actually have contributed to my campaigns talk, when they've heard Mr. Pellet's comments, laugh because I'm very belligerent to everybody to make them prove their point to me. I don't just save it for people that don't support my campaign. I am fiercely independent. I voted against my caucus when I think they're wrong. I also can bring both sides of the aisle together, which I've proven over and over again, being asked to serve on several task forces to bring both Republicans and Democrats together to find common solutions. I look forward to serving you another 2 years in Olympia, and I'd appreciate your vote.
Please join me in thanking candidate Jeff Morris and candidate Howard Pellet for being here tonight and for running for public office. The next race we will cover is one for senator. A senator's term is 4 years. The Senate is made up of 49 members, one from each legislative district in the state. 1/2 of the membership of the Senate is up for election each even-numbered year. The Senate's only exclusive duty is to confirm appointments made by the governor. During legislative sessions, the legislature is called upon to enact or reject legislation affecting public policy in the state, provide for the levy and collection of taxes and other revenue to support state government and assist local government, and appropriate funds for these purposes. The salary is the same as the representative at $42,106 annually. Running for 40th District Washington State Senator, we have Kevin Ranker, Democrat, and John Swap, Independent, Grand Old Party. Thank you, and I welcome you here. Welcome you both here today. Now, we have a question for you. I'm not sure what your dice rolls were. Can you share with me?
I'd like to explain the dice rolls. Kevin
No,
Ranker,
I just need to know the number that you got.
Go ahead.
if you're rolling a pair of dice, the best number you can come up with is a 12. So when Senator Ranker rolled an 11, he assumed he was unassailable. I rolled an 11 also. So we're going to do rock, paper, scissors
We've decided we're going to do rock, paper, scissors.
to see who starts.
Is that okay?
Hey, I'm thinking of a number between 1 and 10.
Can't do.
What is your number?
We're
Senator
really
Ra-
excited about rock, paper, scissors.
Candidate Ranker, what is your number?
3.
9.
It is 5. So,
You win.
yes. So candidate
I can deal
Ranker,
with it
We'll do the rock, paper, scissors tomorrow
another time.
time. We have to do it 3 times if you do rock, paper, scissors, and we're limited on time. So let's get right to work. Candidate Ranker, would you like to have your first opening statement and then the closing last statement, or would you like to have the second opening statement? Your choice.
I'll go second. So last comment.
Go second for the opening statement?
Yes.
Okay.
So then I will open and I will close
You will
first.
open, and you have a 2-minute opening
2
statement.
minutes. And
Starting now.
If I go past that, she rings the bell.
She's got a taser.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm John Swap. I'm a candidate for the Washington State Senate in the 40th District. I am a native of Anacortes. My family's been here for several generations, going back to 1890s. Largely, we're a teaching family. I'm one who escaped from the classroom and wound up doing some other things. I've been married for a little over 30 years to one woman, by the way. We have 3 wonderful kids, all of whom were born here in Bellingham. We lived in Bellingham for about 12 years. The kids are all employed in their areas of study, and they're doing wonderfully. I've been in manufacturing since I was a pretty young guy. I started a business in 1996, and I've been in an advanced technology manufacturing business since then. I bring in work from all over the country. I create jobs, so I am bringing money into the Skagit County area, and I create jobs based on that work that I bring in here. I'm very tenacious. I'm pragmatic. I deal with real-world manufacturing and small business problems and budgeting problems on a daily basis. One thing I do that's a little bit different from most other people is that I track the economy in an old-fashioned manner. I have a wall chart that's about 10 feet long, and it covers my business activities from July 1, 1996. I'll track it right next to the Dow Jones Industrial Average and the Standard & Poor's 500. And it's interesting to note, if you stand back and look at my wall chart, that my business exactly has followed the S&P 500. Imagine that. And you would also notice that I've managed through one recession in the early part of the decade, came back out of it, did well for a few years, and now I've been in the 5th year of a recession, a very difficult downturn. And this very difficult financial performance that I see the entire nation in, which is not Kevin Ranker's fault, by the way. As much as I'd like to blame him, I can't.
Thank you.
It was brought me to the point of wanting to jump into government and help solve that problem, because I feel that it's excessive government that has brought this upon the nation, not Washington State, but to the nation. And I think we need to have different people involved at virtually every level to try and solve that. And I think I'm the guy to do that.
Thank you. Candidate Ranker, please.
Thank you. I'm Kevin Ranker. I want to first of all thank. Am I right?
Yes.
You sure?
Apologize.
No worries.
Continue.
Thank you. Does that count? I'm okay.
Give him a second.
I want to thank everybody for coming out this evening. I really appreciate it, and I want to thank the League and all the partners for putting together this forum. I find them very informative for me as well as very thought-provoking, so thank you. So I live on Orcas Island. I live there with my wife and my daughter, this incredible little 4-year-old. My son proudly serves in the U.S. Navy, and I have been honored to serve each of you, or many of you, some of you are from the 42nd, many of you in the Washington State Senate these last 4 years. And one of the things I will say is the last 4 years have been really difficult. We've made some cuts that have impacted our communities dramatically. And we're seeing the impacts of those cuts in each of our lives, be it through the educational system, the programs for the needy that have been discussed earlier this evening in many of the questions, our senior programs, and across the board. I'm also, however, very proud of some of the things we've been able to accomplish in the last few years, particularly the last couple years. This year in the supplemental budget that was talked about earlier, we cut the bleeding, we stopped the bleeding for education. We've made dramatic cuts to education time and time again. This year, we made no cuts to education. That was a Democratic proposal that came forward. We also have created 104,000 jobs in Washington State in the last two, in the general budget 2 years ago, and then the supplemental budget this year. That's a large number of jobs, and we need to stay laser focused on creation of those jobs. Another thing that we've done in the last few years that I'm very proud of, we did this year, which is granting full marriage equality to every loving couple in Washington State. And I think at a time like this, when we are in an economic situation that we are and people in our communities are struggling, is exactly the time that you should do something wonderful like that. So I'm proud of the accomplishments we're making. I look forward to continuing to serve you.
Thank you. Now, your first question is, you'll have 1 minute response time for the questions. What is your definition of the proper role for the Washington State government? Please provide at least one specific example of how you believe the Senate should act to maintain or strengthen that role as you define it. And we're going to have you go first, Candidate Ranker, sorry. I'm
Thank you.
stumbling now here. You guys got me so flustered with the dice and all that.
We'll go back to the rock, paper, scissors if you want. So I think government plays a very critical role in supporting the neediest of our communities and making sure that, I'm going to branch out in 3 different areas here. One is making sure that we provide for those who need support in our communities. The second is through education. The third is through infrastructure. And Representative Morris made an excellent point on this last piece with infrastructure. Infrastructure is something that government does. We build bridges, we build roads, we make them safe so that not only you and your children can get to and from work and school, but also so commerce can happen. So the folks who keep saying, you know, we want smaller government and smaller government is the answer, I would say at what cost? At what cost do we want smaller government? Do we want our roads not to be safe? Do we want commerce not to happen? With regard to education, it's a critical role that we must fulfill, and we must rebuild our educational system, both on the K through 12 level and at the higher ed level. And I think my time's up, so I'll stop there.
Thank you. Candidate Swap, please.
Would you please repeat the question?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
What is your definition of the proper role for Washington state government? Please provide at least one specific example of how you believe the Senate should act to maintain or strengthen that role as you see it.
When I started my business, the state budget was, I think, $17 billion. Today, I think the state budget is $36 billion. In 16 years, it's more than doubled. The state has grown, I think, beyond the level at which it needs to exist. So while we don't, I'm not advocating we cut support to those who need it most. Obviously, we are a society who wants to support those who are very needy and require support, and I'm strongly in support of that. However, we must be very careful not to spend more than we absolutely have to. Given the condition of the economy, there can be no more careless spending. There can be spending, but it has to be spending that is very carefully choreographed to what we actually absolutely need, and frankly, not a dime more. Those people in the private sector are simply running out of the ability to pay for this. So I'm not necessarily a smaller government at any cost kind of a guy, but understand there is a new need for caution today than we've seen before, and that whoever wins this race and goes to Olympia in January will face a real difficult time trying to bring this under control. There'll be very difficult balances to meet.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If you were able to single-handedly devise an energy policy for Washington, what do you consider the top priorities for legislative support? Candidate Ranker, please.
I think expanding the opportunities that, frankly, Representative Morris has been leading the way on for quite a while now with regard to renewable energy. There is such an incredible opportunity with regard to not only creating a much greater renewable energy sector in Washington State, but also the jobs associated with that. We've seen something recently in the wildfires in eastern Washington that's very interesting, and it's very depressing as well, but we have lost many jobs in eastern Washington because of the wildfires in ranching. Some of these ranchers, however, that I've spoken to recently were talking about the only income they have coming in right now is from the leasing of the wind turbines that are still remaining on their property. That is a very unique and unusual example of how far-fetched it can go with regard to the jobs associated with the renewable energy sector. So I think a priority should be that we need to expand our renewable energy sector in wind and offshore wind and tidal and wave energy, as well as trying to make sure that we integrate natural gas where we can, like with the example of bringing our coal plant in Centralia offline and moving it over to natural gas.
Thank you. Candidate Swap, please.
I think Washington State is very different from most states in that we have so much energy provided by hydroelectric dams. I think that the current rate is about 70%. Now, in the 30s, when they were first building dams here and generating a great deal of inexpensive energy, aluminum companies like Alcoa were invited to come to Washington. Bring your heavy industry here for this inexpensive power, and we can build and you can grow here. And the aluminum industry has provided thousands upon thousands of good-paying jobs for many, many years, in the neighborhood of 80 years. So I'm a big fan of hydroelectric power. Now, it may be that we want to encourage the power companies to rebuild their turbines with more efficient turbines and build better fish ladders so that we can engineer fish ladders that can get fish around the dams rather than tear them out. I'm also willing to experiment to some degree with some of what we would consider alternative energies, but understand that the cost may be so high that some of the things, the businesses that may use that electricity find the cost higher than they can, so high that they can't compete with foreign suppliers or other states, and we may lose jobs because of that. Thank you.
Thank you. Your next question. There is a proposal for a water bottling plant in Anacortes. What is your view of using water from the Skagit River and allowing the tribes to sell it? And we will start with candidate Swap this time.
I guess I have to stand in favor of the Tethys water bottling plant. It will provide a few jobs in an economy that desperately needs them. The Skagit River appears to have a great water supply. If the water supply turns out in a few years to have been miscalculated and that there is a danger of running our water levels down too low, then that contract could be disrenewed or we could take another look at it. But as what I see now, I would be in favor of doing that. I think the economy is so weak right now. So many businesses are just hanging on by their fingernails to existence. And there are so few people who are actively working in good wage-paying jobs. I think we have to hang on to every one of them that we can for now. And so I would be behind that effort today.
Thank you. Candidate Rinker, please.
Thank you very much. So I have some concerns with the proposal. The first off is, and I will admit up front that I'm still diving into the facts on this, and I have some reports at home that I haven't finished reading. My understanding, however, is that we're talking to up to a 50-year lease on the water availability. So we're talking about a water right for 50 years. So as my opponent just said, if in the future we have a concern and we need more water out of the Skagit, keeping in mind, everyone, that I believe fresh water is the single most important commodity we have. And so if that's the case and people accept that as the truth, then signing a 50-year lease to give away a massive amount of water that is now reserved for the communities in that area, I have some serious concerns with. The second concern I have is that I just personally have a serious problem with bottled water in plastic bottles. The amount of plastics in our marine ecosystem, which is my expertise, I could go on for another 4 hours about the different impacts associated with that. So I don't like the idea of building new facilities to continue that problem.
Thank you. And I'd like to remind everyone to make sure your cell phones are off.
What's the score?
Yeah.
Stand on coal exporting through Puget Sound, Cherry Point, Gateway Pacific, and we will start with candidate Swap, please.
Again, I'm going to take the difficult stance, I guess I'm in favor of it. Again, the economy is extremely weak. We need those jobs. The Chinese are going to burn coal for power in vast quantities. We can't stop that. A friend of mine was just in China last year on business, which is, I won't try and get into that little issue, but maybe I can get a chance to go there in a minute. He says the power plants in China are very common. They're all over the place. Every city's got one. They have very short brick buildings, so the smokestacks are not high, putting the contamination high up in the atmosphere. It's very low down, and so it's gray, blue skies, blue smoke all over. A lot of the coal is transported by water. The coal, the waterways are black with dust. I don't know how to stop that. We can't force the Chinese to control their energy supply. We don't have any authority to do that, but we need those jobs, so I'm going to have to side with them.
Thank you. Candidate Rinker, please.
Yeah, so I've been the lead in the Washington State Senate for over 2 years on this issue, demanding that we do a programmatic or an area-wide environmental impact statement for a few reasons, not the least of which is that typically an EIS, an environmental impact statement, looks at just the site, so in this case it would be just Cherry Point. I think that is naive. We're talking about trains coming in through Spokane, following the Columbia River, and coming all the way up the I-5 corridor to this community. There is a significant impact associated with that, be it through the particulate matter associated with the diesel or the coal dust or many other things. That doesn't even get to the whole discussion of vessel traffic. I am very proud that I have been the lead and I sponsored the legislation that has created the strongest oil spills preparedness response program in the country right here in Washington State. That program, however, is based on the current amount of vessel traffic. So when I've spoken to the proponents of the project, I've said, okay, so are you going to pay for the increase in the oil spills preparedness and response program? And they've said, no. That's okay. So what I would ask is, okay, who's going to pay for those different impacts associated with that? And one last point, can I get 10 seconds more because of that? One last point on the jobs, which is I believe that there are jobs associated with this proposal. That's a given. But there are also potential impacts into communities. And the one that I like to point out is right down in Mount Vernon, the Skagit River Brewery is this old brick building right on the railroad tracks. And right now, when you go in there for a burger and a train comes by, the whole building shakes, but it's kind of a novelty because it happens every hour and a half, 2 hours, 3 hours. If that happens every 45 minutes, that's not a novelty, that's a migraine.
Thank you.
Sorry.
I remind you, when the red sign goes up, you're supposed to finish your sentence. Just
We're
say.
both politicians.
I know. Pretty good at it, too. All right. This next question, what, if any, changes do you think should be made in the State Environmental Protection Act or its regulations? Please explain your thinking, and we will start with you, candidate Ranker.
Okay. So a couple things. First of all, SEPA, the State Environmental Policy Act, is an excellent bill that protects our environment as well as making sure that our communities grow in an appropriate way in conjunction with the Growth Management Act and the Shoreline Management Act. That said, there are some places where we can make reforms and changes, and one of those I did last year, which was with regard to non-conforming uses. So you built your house in the shoreline, this gets complicated, I'll be fast. Built your house in the shoreline legally 50 years ago, the buffer changes. You get called a non-conforming use. And so you're trying to sell your house, and the realtor tells the person who wants to buy their house, well, it's a non-conforming use, but that doesn't matter. And the person says, that sounds like it matters. I don't want to buy the house. That creates a problem. So I passed a law that got rid of the term non-conforming use. The protections are still in place, but it creates a little bit more regulatory certainty. So there are things we can do within these acts that do not weaken them for the environment, yet at the same time give a little more certainty to the regulatory system.
Thank you. Candidate Swap, please.
I am by nature a beachcomber. I've been a beachcomber since I was a little kid. I love it. I always have. I do today. I always will. I spend as much time on the beach as I can, good weather, bad weather. I also spend a lot of time on the water. So even though I'm a small manufacturing business guy, I'm very sensitive to environmental issues. I love this environment here. I don't want to see us foul our own nest. And as to plastic bottles, I pick up plastic bottles all the time, and I really don't like them. This is an area that will require very careful balancing, because I've seen from an environmentally connected business standpoint, certain industries related to the aircraft industry are gone today. They're gone. They've been shipped out of the state because they cannot be performed here. There's freon vapor degreasing, double disc grinding, a lot of plating processes can't be done. So a lot of manufacturing businesses are tied together like this. And if you take out 3 or 4 legs to that industry, the rest of them will all be affected. And that affects employment throughout Puget Sound, wherever the aircraft industry is operating, wherever industry is operating. I could probably go on for a long time here. Are you going to give me the dinger? Okay, all right.
The taser.
Thank you. There is truth across the entire political spectrum. Please give an example of when you learned something from across the aisle. Candidate Ranker.
Yeah, so I chair the Energy, Natural Resources, and Marine Waters Committee in the Washington State Senate, and I also write that portion of the budget, at least the first few drafts. 2 years ago, I had begun my work on that budget in September. In January, after we were already in Olympia, when I had a pretty good solid first draft, my Ways and Means chair came up to me and said, oh, we're doing a bipartisan process this year. I kind of said, well, my budget's written. And he said, well, rewrite it, and you're going to write it with Senator Schessler. Senator Schessler and I knew each other, but not well. We went off campus and we sat down and we realized that 90% of that budget we agreed upon. The other thing I realized, this is a great man. He's a really good guy, and we care about a lot of the same things. And so we ended up finalizing this budget together and coming to some compromises. And I believe that politics has to be the art of yes, so almost everything is compromise, except for 2 areas, which is marriage equality and women's reproductive rights. There's no room for compromise.
Candidate Swap, please.
You'll notice that I'm running as an independent GOP. That means I don't cross the aisle, I'm in it. I'm standing it. Sometimes I'm facilitating the discussions between this side and this side while I stand in the middle of the aisle. Other times I'm blocking things because I can do that as well. Politics over the last few years especially has become very acrimonious and very partisan. There's some very hard left people on the D side. There's some very hard right people on the R side. I like them all because, frankly, there's some real good on both sides if you look a little deeper than most people will look, and there's a lot of value to both sides. Most people, however, are somewhat to the left on some issues and somewhat to the right on others, and that's where I stand. So I haven't been in office to deal with both sides of the aisle, but I think maybe you see where I stand on that. I'm going to work with everybody, regardless of what affiliation they claim.
Thank you. Many ways have been suggested to maintain current state facilities, such as parks and highways, by charging admission or tolls. Do you agree or disagree with this approach, and why? We'll start with candidate Swap, please.
Thank you. I don't like it. The citizens already own these facilities. We should be able to use them without fees. And I know that my opposition is part of that debate, but I really have to say that I really do not like excessive fees to use the parks and facilities and so forth. We already own them. Let's try and fund them another way. Obviously, we have to have these facilities in wonderful shape. They need to stay beautiful and accessible to everybody. During these difficult times, grandparents who want to take the grandkids down to the park find that they can't do it maybe without spending an extra 10 or 20 bucks. And today, as crazy as it sounds, that 10 or $20 can make a lot of difference. So I think we're putting a real serious burden on people who might be at the bottom end of the economic ladder and who just want to enjoy their parks and then can't do it. So I'm against it.
Thank you. Candidate Ranker?
Well, I better be forward. I wrote the bill. Here's the reality. In working with our Washington State Parks Commission and looking at the list of parks that would, not could, but would have been closed, it was not an option to do something, to take a stand and go in a different direction. And the very harsh reality is there were parks right here in this community and right here in this district that would have been closed. Keep in mind that these aren't only and let me make one other point, is in the bill we also have opportunities for volunteering and other ways to get it so you don't have to pay the $30 to get into the park. So there are those options written into the legislation. One other point I want to make, these aren't just opportunities for outdoor recreation and outdoor enjoyment that each of us love, they are critical economic drivers. Outdoor recreation in Washington State accounts for $6.1 billion in annual spending, directly supporting 60,000 jobs. If that were an individual company, this legislature would be bending over backwards to give them tax breaks. So in keeping these parks open, we're also keeping people employed and maintaining economic drivers in our community. I think it's critical.
Thank you. The United States has a larger percentage of its population in prison than any country in the world. Then why is this, and what ideas do you have for reducing state expenditures on prisons? I would like to start with candidate Swap, please. Thank
you for that question. I think part of the driver behind that is the 3 strikes and you're out bill. The society has had enough of violent and career criminals. And when someone has proven themselves to be a serious and continuing danger to society, we want to end that. We want to put them away. We don't necessarily want to kill them, but we want to get them off the streets so they don't prey on us again. And on one side, I think that's absolutely understandable. But I think sometimes there are too many criminal people who are put into prison who might not necessarily be a real threat to society. And I'm thinking probably some of the minor drug crimes. We should look very carefully at how we sentence people to long periods in prison. And some of them may need to be reduced, and some of them may need to be increased. But if we don't really need them there, a very long sentence might not help somebody who's in prison for a minor drug crime.
Thank you. Candidate Ranker, please.
Can you repeat the question, please?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
The United States has a larger percentage of its population in prison than any country in the world. Why is this, and what ideas do you have for reducing state expenditures on prisons?
Okay, so I spent the last few hours this afternoon before coming here attending the drug court graduation right here in Bellingham. And it was one of the more powerful experiences I've had in recent time. It was incredible. Seeing these people that were repeat offenders, that had serious drug problems and serious records, making a choice, volunteering into this program, instead of going to prison, and a couple of the gentlemen I was speaking to afterward had proposed sentences of 130 and 210 months. So these are not light sentences. Instead of going to prison and all the money and everything else that costs, they elected to go into the drug court. And through the drug court, they spent a year, up to 2 years, becoming clean and sober, and learning to take their own responsibilities and learning to become a wonderful person in our community. And so I think one of the things I want to do is work as hard as I can to replicate what's happening here in Bellingham and other communities and fund it right here in Bellingham and other communities.
Thank you. In considering the possibility of further cuts in the state budget, what would be the first program you would cut and what would be the last and why? And we will start with candidate Ranker, please.
Great. So what would be the first program I would cut? I've been pretty harsh in my own budget, the section of the budget I write, because I'm most familiar with it. But what I would say is I would go back to a comment I made earlier, which is at what cost? At some point, we need to start realizing that we can't continue to cut government and expect the same services. And let me point out something. Bill Ruckelshaus, who is just an incredible individual, and we were so lucky to have him living here in Washington State, said something recently when he and I were on a panel together. He said, okay, I just turned 80 years old. When I was born, there was 2 million people on this planet. 2 billion people on this planet, and it took millions of years to get to 2 billion people. And then in his own lifetime, he said, now it's only been my lifetime, 80 years, and we've more than tripled that. There are more people here to continue to ask for the same thing with this many people and have the same actions, taking the same actions. We're not going to get the same result. So my time's up, and I had another really important point there. But
I appreciate it. All right, candidate Swap, sorry.
I'm going to be contrarian. The last place I'm going to make the cut probably is in education. Again, I'm a little biased there. I got teachers going back several generations, and I think they're all pretty good folks. And I think with as crucial as good education is to solving our nation's problems in the future, you have to be extremely careful cutting education. I do say we have to have the states a bit smaller, so I think I would try and start reducing virtually all of the other departments. Every state dime has to be spent extremely carefully. I'll say again what I said before, we just don't have the money to not reduce, we don't have the tax base to continue spending the way we are. We have to bring it down.
Thank you. And now for your closing statements. Candidate Swap, you have 1 minute for a closing statement.
1 minute only. Okay. I'm a big believer in small government. And we in this country forget how free we are to run our lives the way we choose to run them. And I got to tell a quick story. I live on a non-ferry island. Our primary residence is on Decatur Island, so I'm on the water a lot. I'm on the water 52 weeks of the year. I'm not a casual boater. I'm a crazy boater. But I have my limits, and when the weather is too rough for me, I ride on a water taxi. And the water taxis, in really rough weather, the people on board tend to congregate in the pilot house, where you got one guy running the boat and everybody else standing around trying to be brave, show us how scared we're not, and tell dumb jokes, which are very funny, of course, and tell stories. And we were in Rosario Strait in a windstorm one day, and there was a woman on board in a heavy European accent. She's from Holland. And she tells me, I love America because America is still wild. And I'm thinking, well, you don't have windstorms in Holland? She said, well, of course, that's not what she's talking about. That brought it out of her. In Holland, she says, all the yards are the same. They have the same picket fence. The houses are painted the same color. They have the appropriate flowers growing in the correct window box at all the appropriate windows, and they don't get to make all of their own decisions. Okay. That's 2 times she's rung the bell for me. I'm ahead.
Thank you.
Only 1 for you.
Candidate Ranker, please.
See if I can't get a
Your
bell
closing
this time.
statement, 1 minute.
So I'm actually going to finish my other answer first from the previous question, which is I agree that one of the last cuts I want to make one of the last areas I want to make any additional cuts to is education. But we also need to keep in mind when we say, fund education first, there are things that prepare our children to come to school to be ready to learn, like making sure their parents have the services they need, making sure that the home environment has the services it needs, making sure that if there's a mental health problem in that family, that's being taken care of. There are a number of different things, and so it comes down to prioritization. So I would say that as Washingtonians, we have a problem. We have very high expectations, and we have lower revenues. So that's a simple equation. You can decrease your expectations or increase your revenues, but to continue to ask for the same of government with no additional resources is unrealistic. So you, as the voters, tell me where to make that cut. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming tonight, people.
I got a bell.
You got a bell. That
I think maybe they could have moderated their own forum here.
John's a great guy.
You were both great. Thank you. And I appreciate your running for public office. Please, the screening committee has informed me that you could be writing more questions if you like. That would be wonderful. Oh, they are? Okay. All right. And we are continuing on with candidates for the 42nd District, Washington State Representative, Position 1. May I introduce you to Jason Overstreet, Republican, and Natalie McClendon, Democrat. Thank you for being here tonight. Candidate McClendon won. And what was your choice? Would you like to have the first opening statement or the last opening statement? Last opening statement, okay. All right, we will start with you, and it's a 2-minute opening statement starting now.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for everyone coming and spending your evening here. My name is Natalie McClendon. I'm running for state representative in the 42nd District, Position 1, currently held by my opponent, Jason Overstreet. I've lived here in Whatcom County for over 20 years. While I don't have a multi-generational roots here in Whatcom County, we put down roots right away. We have 2 sons who went to school here in Bellingham and graduated and had great educations here. I served as a president of the local PTA, the elementary school PTA, and as a Cub Master and den leader in my kids' Cub Scout pack, and also as a leader in the Boy Scout troop. I am a former teacher. I taught at Timber Ridge High School out in the county. It's an alternative school for most of the school districts in the county, and as a result, I've worked with people all over the county. And my husband and I support ourselves with a small business. He's a photographer here in Bellingham, and we've done that off and on, and that is to say, with success and not success over 20 years, because we ride the waves of the economy and in an industry that's had a lot of changes. I am, as a small business owner, I hope to use my real-world experience to make tough decisions in the legislature to balance the budget and to bring my teaching experience to bear on making sure that we've prepared our kids with the best education possible.
Thank you. Candidate Overstreet, please.
Thank you, and good evening, Whatcom County, and thank you to the League of Women Voters and all of the sponsors and co-sponsors of this event. My name is Jason Overstreet. I'm a 38-year-old husband to my wife Jessica, who's here with me tonight, of 16 years, and a father of 5 children. I'm also a Whatcom County small business owner. I'm also by trade a firefighter. I spent 5 years on the Blaine City Council, and this is my first re-election bid for the State House. It's been a privilege to work for and serve the 42nd District. And as part of my opening statement, I just want to build on a question that was asked of multiple sets of candidates earlier, and that is this. What is your view? What is your philosophy of government? And do you know what was not mentioned? 4 times. The United States and Washington State Constitution. These are the documents that govern us and that should guide our views on government. They are the cornerstone, they are the restraints on political power, not on you, but on us. And that was not mentioned. Following up those documents, when you are elected, you take an oath of office. And you take an oath of office to uphold, protect, and defend those documents. So what is my view on government? What is my philosophy on government? It is guided by the U.S. and Washington State Constitution, and I will continue to uphold, defend, and protect those documents. My name is Jason Overstreet. It's a privilege for me to be here tonight. It's a privilege for me to serve you, and I look forward to continuing doing so for the next 2 years. Thank you.
Thank you. Please hold applause. We don't have enough time. The state Supreme Court has ruled that Washington is not meeting its constitutional responsibility to fully fund public education. How do you define fully funded, and how would you achieve this? And we will start with candidate Overstreet, please.
So the McCleary decision is an interesting one. The court didn't even want to take up this question, and they didn't want to take it up because they didn't know how to define basic education. So what they did is they looked back to 2 bills that were passed just a couple of years before my time, and they said, if you do that, that would be basic education. If you fully fund those bills that you guys have passed and not appropriated any money for, that would be fully funding education. That is the McCleary decision. The real question that needs to be asked is this. Why, as one of my first votes as a freshman legislature in the Washington State House of Representatives, was there a party line vote? Republicans, yes, to fund education first per Article 9 of the Washington State Constitution. Democrats, no. That is the question as we delve into education tonight that needs to be asked. Not only did they vote no there, the House Republican Caucus presented another bill in 2012. It was called unworkable, and it was killed in committee.
Thank you. Candidate McClendon, please.
So as a former teacher, I bring a passion about making sure that we have good schools for all children. The purpose of the wealthy individuals and families can always get high-quality education. Our goal and responsibility as a state government is to make sure we have that education for everybody else. We have a very difficult situation because we have obligations, goals that we've set for ourselves, goals that we've set in the Constitution, that it is the paramount responsibility of the state to provide education. But we are not necessarily prepared yet to do that funding. We have a disconnect between what people are willing to, what people ask for, and what voters and the general public are willing to pay for. And that's going to be our struggle.
Thank you. The next question. What legislation and/or policies do you believe are necessary to sustain and support agriculture, a major economic factor in your district? We will start again with candidate Overstreet.
Well, I don't think there are any new laws that need to happen in order to support agriculture. What needs to happen is the state legislature, through the repeal of GMA, needs to once again respect the rights of the property owner. Article 1, Section 16 of our state constitution makes it very clear that if there are government-required actions of private property after due process of law, that person is due compensation. I actually ran a bill to do just that, which is really sort of crazy based on the fact that it's enshrined in our Constitution. Property rights are all but a distant past in the state of Washington and, dare I say, the United States of America. And there is probably no better example of principles, again, that are firmly grounded in both the U.S. and Washington state constitutions. And until we do that, farmers, we will continue to push our agriculture overseas where they aren't feeling those pressures and those burdens. Let's help our farmers and our property owners and respect their stewardship.
I remind you, when the red sign is up, it means please finish your sentence as quickly as possible. And candidate McClendon?
We right here in Whatcom County, we have a really important and long-serving, long-living agricultural community, and it's a huge part of our economy here. My opponent mentions the GMA and says that it's totally in the way of farmers, and I disagree with that. Not necessarily specific parts of the law, but the general idea that we provide zoning to protect farmland, And that's part of what the GMA is asking for us to do, is to make sure that we don't take over farmland by too many people sprawling out into the farmland, and that we maintain large enough areas that are viable as farm units.
Thank you. If you were able single-handedly to devise an energy policy for Washington, what do you consider the top priorities for legislative support? And we will start with candidate McClendon, please.
Well, one of the best ways to save energy and to create renewable energy is to save it. Weatherization, conservation. It's a huge, can be a huge portion of our solution to high energy costs. And there are incentives in law right now, and we need to maintain those and see where we can strengthen those. My husband and I happen to also be the owner of a small solar power plant on the roof of our house. And this is an area where every individual with some means can contribute to energy. And with incentives from the state and also from the federal government, we can expand that.
Thank you. Candidate Overstreet, please.
Did you know that when we sell our hydroelectric power to California, it's considered renewable? But did you also know that when we use it inside the state of Washington, it is not? This is the kind of craziness that is going on in Olympia. And I can tell you that as a 5-year city council member, I had to deal with this because cities are required to buy a certain percentage of multiple kinds of renewable energy. That energy is so expensive that it hamstrings, especially smaller municipalities, of which the 42nd has many of them. We need to just start with common sense, and these should not be partisan issues. Let's make hydroelectricity renewable according to the law in Washington state.
Thank you. The next question is, should Washington state government be trying to increase access to health care? And if yes, how? And do you support accepting Medicaid dollars from the federal government? The first respondee would be candidate McClendon, please.
Start with the second part of that question. Yes, I do support accepting federal dollars from the federal government for the Affordable Care Act implementation. We have a great opportunity to get many, many people covered with health insurance. Now I've forgotten the second part of the question.
Should Washington state government be trying to increase access to health care?
Yes, okay. Kind of the same thing. Just an example, I mean, my husband and I are self-employed and pay an individual health insurance policy over $700 with a deductible of $10,000. It's unsustainable, and I'm looking forward to implementing the Affordable Care Act here in Washington.
Thank you. Candidate Overstreet,
Can you
please.
repeat the question, please?
Absolutely. Should Washington state government be trying to increase access to health care? And if yes, how? Do you support accepting Medicaid dollars from the federal government?
Should the state be trying to increase the access to health care? Absolutely. And you do that by increasing options. And when you increase options in the marketplace, supply and demand takes over and you see lower prices with more choices. I'll give you a really sad story that happened just a few months ago, and I was surprised it didn't get more play in the press. The insurance commissioner killed a middle ground insurance policy for those people who couldn't afford the best premium but didn't want to go down to the lowest premium. And he did that because they were able to offer that plan because it offered generic-only prescriptions. And the insurance commissioner by fiat, he's an individual independently elected official, said that is not fair. The customer should be able to have generics and name brands. He pushed a plan out of the state of Washington which eliminated, I think, 40,000 plans. Unbelievable. We need to increase options.
Thank you. Last year, voters approved the privatization of liquor sales in Washington. Are there any other revenue-producing state services or programs that you believe should or could be privatized? Why or why not? And we'll start with candidate Overstreet, please.
Absolutely, thank you. Well, I'm struck by the vans that move around the campus and frankly all around the state, and it's called consolidated mail services. Let's let the private sector deliver government mail. Let's do that. The other thing, as we drive into the campus every morning during the session, we see what's termed as the huge DIS building. It's basically a huge server farm for the state. Do you know that that building, I believe, is about 50,000 square feet, some of the most expensive square footage in the state of Washington? And do you know that the day that was done, a consultant came in and said, oops, the state actually needs about 4,000 square feet. It was a boondoggle that in a bipartisan manner, Reuven Carlisle, Democrat from Seattle, even pushed back against that. Let's sell that thing. Let's sell that building, cut our losses, and don't make mistakes like that again. When we have a chance to privatize, to create jobs in the private sector, let's do that instead.
Thank you. Candidate McClendon, please.
When we think about privatization of government services, we're not really creating new jobs. We're shifting jobs that are currently held by publicly employed people. And so I want to make sure that we understand that privatization doesn't necessarily create jobs, but the idea is that it might save money because of a perceived or real chance at, say, competition driving down prices. We need to be very careful about to scrutinize whether or not we would actually save money for the taxpayer when we privatize. I mean, businesses make decisions all the time about whether to do work in-house or contract out to do it. There's additional costs for contracting out to make sure that things are operated properly, there's not fraud in the contracting process, and things like that.
Thank you. The next question is, should business owners be heavily fined when they invoke conscience to opt out of selling contraceptives, pharmacies, or facilitating same-sex weddings, photographers, catering, ministers? Why or why not? And we would start with candidate Overstreet, please.
Excellent question, and that question understands the current issue, which is R74. And while R74 does have some loose language that protects clergy, it does not, let me say this again, it does not protect the right of conscience, the right of religion for the individual or for the business owner. Article 1, Section 11 of this document guarantees that to you, and it guarantees it to me. Not only Article 1, Section 11, but Article 26, which is with the state's compact with the United States of America. We have a serious question on our hands. And that is, are we going to violate the rights of conscience for people who don't want to participate? And if you don't think that can happen, it already has. It happened in New Mexico with a Christian couple that are photographers who declined. They were taken to court, they've lost. They owe $7,000, and they're going to keep appealing up the chain, and I hope that they win. But that is what we're up for.
Thank you. Candidate McClendon, please.
I don't have all the exact facts about the marriage equality law, but we make choices all the time about who we choose to contract with, to do services, and planning a wedding is no different. I don't see any particular need for fines. People make choices, and I mean, if we're talking just about a wedding, then clergy make decisions, particularly all the time, about whether the couple is suitable to be married. They interview them and discuss the values, the religious values that are part of that particular religion. So I don't have a problem with it.
Thank you. My next question is, do you think the private sector would be better to provide for fire, police, prisons, and schools. And we'll start with candidate McClendon, please.
All right, repeat the question.
Do you think the private sector would be better suited, it seems like there's a word missing there, would be better suited to provide for fire, police, prisons, and schools?
Generally, no. And the reason is that, particularly when we talk about education, it's a huge responsibility. It is a responsibility of the state. It's in the Constitution. As I mentioned before, that is a duty that we have chosen as a society to make sure that our children are educated. And so I think that it's important that we maintain the control of that directly. In other ways, I think it's really important to think about who we're dealing with. You know, it's one thing to have a factory where you're making things and the quality control is based on, you know, you can look and see and feel it. But when you're dealing with people, and particularly people who are vulnerable, such as people in a prison, I know we don't maybe think of them as vulnerable, but they're locked up. They don't have a choice.
Thank you.
It's important to
All right, she was
yeah,
waving the
okay,
red flag.
Stop.
And candidate Overstreet, please.
No, I don't. Having answered that question, I'm going to go back to the prior question. I am familiar with the bill. And let me say this again, that while there is language in there to protect clergy and their right of conscience, the individual and the business owner is not. And if that question is one about treating people equally under the law, then I ask you, what about this law? What about this law? We've got a serious question to ask ourselves coming up on November 6th, and I hope that you keep that in mind, because what's good for the goose is good for the gander, and these kinds of things, unfortunately, can cut both ways. Thank you.
Thank you. The next question is, would you please state and explain your position on Initiative 1240 establishing 40 public charter schools in the state? And we will start with candidate McClendon, please.
I'm personally opposed to the charter schools amendment initiative. And the reason for that is that we have already a funding problem in our schools, and our school boards, our locally controlled and elected school boards, spend huge amounts of time and effort carefully managing the resources they have available to them, shifting around students and buildings and making sure that the facilities are adequate. And if we take money, those students who might be part of a charter school, they leave the district, they take their money, the state money with them, then it throws the whole balance out, and the school districts, you know, the school may not even be viable anymore. We have those situations now with, say, with Mountain View School in Ferndale.
Thank you. Candidate Overstreet, please.
I generally agree with my opponent. We can't manage what we have now, and so what we're going to do is go create another unelected bureaucracy in the form of a charter school commission. Appointed by who? Accountable to who? One of the things that's really struck me in Olympia is how many appointed officials on committees, boards, and commissions we have. And they're generally appointed by one person, the governor. You may agree with this governor, you may not agree with the next governor. Again, an issue that cuts both ways. And so I have some real misgivings about taking the authority over taxpayer dollars, over curriculum, over all of the things that affect education, and giving them to unelected folks.
Thank you. What are the biggest challenges facing our transportation system in Washington State, and what ideas do you have on addressing those challenges? We will start with you, candidate Overstreet.
I think one of the biggest hurdles that faces us is that for the last decade, maybe the last 20 years, the train of thought has been to invest in everything but roads. I agree, probably with my opponent, probably with some of the prior speakers. Our infrastructure in some places is literally crumbling. And we're focused on trails, and we're focused on bike paths, and we're focused on mass transit, which serves generally metropolitan areas and serves roughly 2% of the population. Are these good things? Absolutely, they're good things. We would all like to have them as amenities in our community. But if infrastructure is so vitally important to our business community, to move government around, police and fire, then let's invest in it. Stop building sound walls on I-5 and invest in lane miles, maintenance, and construction.
Thank you. Candidate McClendon, please.
Our transportation funding has been shrinking for many years now, starting with the repeal of the motor vehicle excise tax, and gas taxes, our income is reduced as well as people drive less as gas prices are higher and they get more efficient cars. We had an opportunity, my opponent had an opportunity this last session to get some more money into that system with the Jobs Now Act, which was shovel-ready projects for transportation as well as other infrastructure such as drinking water facilities and sewage treatment plants. And he voted no on that. Fortunately, it passed, and it's putting people to work now. We have the tools and we have the opportunities. We need to take them.
Thank you. Candidate Overstreet, we will hear your closing statement now, please.
Excellent. Well, again, my name is Jason Overstreet, and quite frankly, I've been humbled to serve the 42nd District over the last 2 years. It is honestly a privilege to be one of 98 people who get to go into Olympia, stand on the floor, and protect these documents, and inside of these documents, protect and maintain individual rights. I will continue to do so. I would appreciate your continuing support. Please visit my website at voteoverstreet.com. That's voteoverstreet.com. And I just want to say this, while you and I may disagree on specific issues, you will always know where I stand. You will always have an open door to my office and to my phone. So again, while we may disagree, you will know where I stand, and that's important because although Olympia is only 3.5 hours away, that's a long way for a politician to travel. Forget what they told you in a session like this, and then come home and tell you something differently. My name is Jason Overstreet, and I would be privileged, and it would be an honor to once again have your vote. Thank you.
Thank you. Candidate McClendon, please.
Thank you again for being here. I want to promise you that above all else, that I will work very hard to find solutions to our many problems, and I will work across party lines and across the aisles with all my colleagues in the legislature to make that happen. As a former teacher, I'll work with parents across the district and across the state and the political spectrum to make sure that we have good quality schools for all our children. And I hope that I can bring your values of trust, character, and community to Olympia and represent you well. My name is Natalie McClendon. I appreciate your vote, and my website is peoplefornatalie.com. Please visit it.
Please join me in thanking candidate Jason Overstreet and candidate Natalie McClendon for being here tonight. And our final race of the evening is for the 42nd District, Washington State Representative, Position 2. We'll give them a moment to get settled and we'll get started. Running for state representative are Matthew Krogh, Democrat, and Vincent Bies, Republican. We're going to begin with your 2-minute opening statements, and the high number was rolled by candidate Bies. What would you prefer, first opening or second opening?
I will go second, please.
Pardon?
Second, please.
Second, okay. So, candidate Krogh, you have 2 minutes for your opening statement, starting now.
My name is Matt Krogh, and I'm honored to be here. Thank you so much for everybody coming out. I want to talk about myself just for a moment, but first I want to observe what happened in the previous session when I saw Jason Overstreet and Natalie McClendon actually fully agree on something. I thought it was fantastic. I actually agreed with it too. So in my day job, I work to protect water quality. I honestly believe that water is one of the biggest issues that's going to face this community in the decades to come. And I want to make sure that we have clean water to drink, that our fish aren't toxic, that we can catch a fish with our child, and make sure that we're not poisoned. It's fairly simple. I'm a father, I'm a husband, I'm a small business owner with my wife, and the reason I'm running for this office is because I love this place. There are real threats ahead of us, and there are also real opportunities. And I want to make sure that when you send somebody to Olympia, that that person is actually a champion for Whatcom County. We have paths to prosperity that we can actually pursue. There are things that we can actually do to get out of this recession. We're all working hard. Everybody I know is working hard, trying to get past this recession. And when we do, when we invest in education, when we invest in job creation, when we try to bring jobs here to this beautiful place that we live in, that's how we're going to get out of it. It's important to do that, and that's something I'm absolutely committed to. We've heard about important issues tonight. We've heard about education, how we're going to fund education, how we're going to spend our revenues, how we're going to protect the weak among us. Those are the absolutely critical components of government, and I'm committed to doing that with you. So thank you.
Thank you. Candidate Bies, 2 minutes, please.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for being here. I know it's a very lovely evening out there. Hopefully we'll have many more to come. We're supposed to have another week or so. Thank you for being here, taking the time out of your evening. Thank you to the League of Women Voters for your hosting this forum and the other supporters. We appreciate it. It has truly been an honor to serve you guys for the last 2 years. And I look forward to another 2, because we started something great. We started working on a lot of great projects. Some things we've been working on for 20 years, and we were starting to make headway. We don't want to let those things go. In the time that I've been down there, I've been serving on higher education, and I've seen the cuts that have gone on under the current leadership, and I know that we need to do better in higher education. We continue to cut it and expect better results. I look at our regular K-12 system, and I see the cuts that we're making there, but not only the cuts, but places where we can make efficiencies. And I stand firm here, wanting to fund education first. As Representative Overstreet said, this was one of the first votes that we took on the House floor. And I voted to support that, to where we would take the funding for education out of the general budget package, and we would focus on that first. Unfortunately, that did not pass because the Democrat Party turned it down. I also want to continue to work for our business sector. I also serve on the Business and Financial Services. And in that, we have so many opportunities. And one of the things that's interesting, we talk about overregulation of our businesses and how it's hurting our businesses. One of the groups of people that are also starting to come to us now and say, we just can't handle the slog of overregulation, the burden, and that's our government sectors. Our government agencies, our education systems, they're now coming to us saying, there's too many regulations, there's too many rules. Let us have an opportunity to work best for the students and the population that we serve. And we need to continue to do that both in the private sector and in the public sector.
Thank you. The first question is, if you are successful in this race, what guiding principles would you apply in considering legislation and why? And that will go to you, Candidate Krogh, please.
Well, I'm a younger brother, and I can tell you right now that one of the things that is most important to me in life is dealing with injustice. It's true. I think one of the really defining principles of why we have government is to promote equality and equality of opportunity. And if our laws aren't actually addressing that, if they aren't increasing equality, if they aren't making sure that everybody has the same access to opportunity, the same access to education, that you don't have to be worried about going bankrupt just because you're taking your kid in to get treated. Those things, it's not acceptable in our society. And we have to make sure that when we pass a law, when we work with our government, that we are focused like a laser on equality and equal opportunity.
Candidate Bies, please.
Thank you. Well, it's very simple. The three principles that I stand on when I make decisions: the good book, the law book, and the checkbook. Is it right to do? Are we allowed to do it under the state constitution and the federal constitution? And thirdly, if it's a good idea and it's the right thing to do, can we afford it? There's a lot of ideas that we have that are absolutely good. Most ideas that come before us as a state and as a legislature are inherently good ideas. It's just sometimes we can't afford them, and our priorities have to be placed someplace else.
Thank you. All right, the next question. Excluding education, what are your 3 top priorities for legislative funding in the coming 2 years, and why? And we're going to start with Candidate Bies, please.
Thank you. We hear a lot of talk tonight about, the state is going broke. Our last year's, our budget had $2 billion, over $2 billion more. There's a 7% increase in our state general fund balance. We're going to see another increase in our next budget. And let me explain how the budget process works. I was recently at a meeting with a member of the Fish and Wildlife Department, one of our state agencies, and she presented me with their next budget coming up. When I looked at the bottom line, there was a 22% increase in what they wanted from the general fund. So every agency presents their budget, and they have something similar like that. It's not necessarily 22%, this was just for this particular one. And that becomes the baseline for our next budget. So they gather all these, and we're told any deviation from that, below that number, is considered a cut. We increased education funding in our K-12 system by $650 million last year. We will continue to have more money.
Thank you. Candidate Krug, please.
Jobs, health, and taxes. For jobs, I think one of the most important things we can do is make sure that we spend our tax money right here in Washington. Today, when we buy things, we have no made in Washington guarantee. We're shipping dollars out of state. And one of the most important things we can do is make sure we spend that money here so it recycles back through our communities and creates more jobs. Healthcare, we absolutely have to have access to healthcare. For folks who talk about the costs of healthcare, the costs are so much higher if we don't provide it to everybody. Emergency rooms are not actually a good place to get a checkup. I've tried, trust me. Then finally, on the taxation issue, we have regressive taxes in this state. We absolutely have to fix it. Right now, our tax system is not fair. The poor and the middle class are paying far too much in taxes, and we need to fix it. Thank you.
Thank you. Next question is, what specific skills will you bring to Olympia that will lead to cooperative efforts to solve our budget problems without partisan rancor? And we will start that with Candidate Bies, please.
Thank you. Well, I have worked very much across the aisle in the last 2 years that I've been down there. As Representative Litton so eloquently stated, most of the time, about 85% to 90% of the time, we agree on things. In fact, one of my favorite bills that we were able to get, and I'm reminded of it every time I go to Costco, is the fact that Representative Litton and myself and Representative Overstreet and Representative Morris and Senator Ranker and Senator Erickson, we all supported a bill that would make sure that our Canadian neighbors continue to pay sales tax here. That's one opportunity that we had, and I sat down in the committee hearing with Representative Litton, sharing, even in opposition to some of the business groups who didn't want to see that tax go on there, sharing a view and promoting that, and we eventually got that bill passed. It passed, we used the Senate bill, but we were able to get that through in a bipartisan fashion, and that extremely supported Whatcom County government, especially.
Thank you. And Candidate Krug, please.
I'm the only Democrat in a family of Republicans, and we all have Thanksgiving dinner together, we have Christmas together, and so far it's going pretty well. I did marry into another family of Democrats, and we have had combined dinners, and those have also been almost as successful. In my day job, I actually work with people of all types. I've sat on committees with some folks who are here tonight, and I think what Mr. Bies just said is actually critical. We do agree on a whole lot of the issues. How we get there is a problem. And I work every day to solve real problems with water quality, real problems that have to do with government regulation, that have to do with their impacts on people. And I know that if we talk to folks who are actually impacted, if we work across the aisle to make sure that we have an understanding of what regulation does, what government does, get that feedback back into the legislature, that we can hear those messages, and we'll absolutely be able to work together. So thanks.
Thank you. What is your stance on the Georgia Pacific Terminal coal terminal at Cherry Point? That would be for candidate Krogh, please.
I'm on record for the last couple of years, I think, of being absolutely opposed to the coal terminal, and I encourage you to take a look at that record and all the environmental reasons, but I'd like to focus on something else. Right now, this proposal would take subsidized coal out of federal lands, charge the taxpayer for all the rail improvements to ship it through our communities. We would pay for that as it gets transshipped, sent to China, where it's burned by people who are competing with us economically, where you'd be subsidizing every single one of those 100,000 or more jobs in competition with our workers right here. This is a question of jobs, and the question of jobs is, how many are we willing to subsidize in another country right now at the cost of our taxes and our environment and our human health?
Hold your applause, please. I apologize. I said Georgia Pacific. I don't know where my brain is.
We knew what you were talking about.
Obviously.
It was a G and a P.
I think I must be getting tired. Gateway Pacific Terminal. And Candidate Byes, we'd like to hear your stance on that as well.
Well, like any government agency or program that goes through government, I think government has to take an impartial look at it. Whether it's an idea I agree with or whether it's an idea I do not agree with, we have to let it go through a process. We have a 2-year process that this will go through to understand the effects that it's going to have. I don't think it's government's role, because an individual in government doesn't like something, that we should stand opposed to it. Allow it to go through the process. That's what the legislature is. It's not one person saying we don't like this. It's where we talk about the things. We review things, and then we come to a consensus or we don't. And that's what we need to do with this project. Just like any other project, whether I may agree with it or not. And once we get that 2-year process out of the way, we'll know what are the impacts, how are we going to mitigate those impacts, and are the investors willing to pay the cost to mitigate those? That's the appropriate way of government to go through this.
Thank you. The next question is, what do you consider the most important issues concerning the agricultural community in your district? And specifically, how do you believe the legislature should address them? And we will start with candidate Krogh, please.
Water. Right now, we are at the beginning of what I believe will be one of the most difficult problems facing this community for decades to come, and that is the access to and cleanliness of water. That is absolutely essential to our communities. I give Mr. Byes credit for working on the wells issue, but the truth is this. It's much larger than that. Right now, we have the farmers, the fishermen, the tribes, the municipalities, all pulling from the same source of water. And as we see changes in the seasons, as we see changes in water availability, as we see all kinds of development, some of it across the border, causing some of that water to not be usable, we are going to have a fight on our hands. And we need real leadership, and we need real people who understand those water issues, actually making sure that they're taken care of.
Thank you. Candidate Byes, please.
Thank you. Well, I guarantee everybody I am a real person, and I have been working on this. Actually, this last year, one of my bills, I was working with the Bellingham Department of Ecology here. I was working with our local water improvement districts. I was working with our local farmers, and we crafted a bill that would address a 20-year-old problem. In fact, the Department of Ecology's Bellingham office was founded here in Bellingham about 20 years ago to solve this problem that the farmers are having up in Whatcom County. 20 years later, we're still dealing with this. My bill, we were able to craft it in a bipartisan way. It came out of Agriculture Committee in a bipartisan fashion. There were a few opponents to it, but that's, typical of any water bill. You're never going to get everybody liking it. But it made it out of committee, and it had a great review. It got stopped in rules, and we're going to continue to push on that next year, because this, working with the different groups, working with ecology, working with the local farmers and the irrigation areas, this was a great idea, and we're going to continue to work on it.
Thank you. How can the state address the shortage of farm labor? Oh, I'm sorry. You got to stop me if I do this. Candidate Krogh, you haven't had an opportunity to answer that last question.
I feel like I did.
Yep. He started.
I can go again and say more.
I apologize.
Lots to say about water.
Okay. So, how can the state address the shortage of farm labor given the national gridlock on reforming immigration laws? And we are going to start with candidate Bies, please.
Thank you. This is a very important issue that we have to face. We have a big problem with Washington State. Our leading production is in agriculture. Our leading economy is agriculture-based. Whatcom County, we are the leading producer of raspberries and strawberries. We are one of the leading producers of dairy products. And many of those products are harvested. Many of our workers in those are of immigrant status. We need to make sure that we get the employees here that we need, but we need to make sure we do it in a legal fashion. We need to make sure that people can come here. That's where we need to work on serious worker reform, or allowing workers to come in from other places, to come here in an effective way, to come here where we know who they are, we know where they're from, and we know where they're at. Just like we know where most of our people, that are legally here. We need to make sure but we also need to make sure that we have the workers here. We cannot just say we need to ship everybody home, because otherwise we're going to have a huge problem. We're going to have a huge shortage, and that's not acceptable.
Thank you. Candidate Krogh, please.
Hard work is really the root of the American dream. It's something that we have here, people who believe in this place, who want to come to this country, and they want to work. And it is one of the most important things that we can do. And I agree, our agricultural sector is absolutely dependent on migrant workers. They're a critical part of our economy. And we have to make sure, though, that every step of the way that we work to develop policy, that we treat these people like who they are. They are us. We are all people who came to this country to work hard and find the dreams in this country. There needs to be dignity at every step of the way. There needs to be opportunity for everyone. And as we work through this, we have to make sure that we hold true to those ideals.
Thank you. Does the state have a responsibility to provide a public safety net for its most vulnerable populations during good and bad economic times? Please provide specific examples of your priorities for state funding in this area. And we will start with candidate Bies, please.
Thank you. Absolutely, the state of Washington has a responsibility. I think it's one right below education and public safety. This is one of the top priorities that we have to have. But one of the things we've done is we say, yes, let's help the disabled. And the disabled, the elderly, the poor, those are absolutely the ones we need to focus on. Unfortunately, what happens is we'll get a program started, and it's being very efficient. And we'll expand that program, and we lose the impact that we have. Rather than having $100 that we can spend on one person, we have $100 that we spend on 20 people. And then the people that really, truly need the help, they don't get the support that they need. And we do that time after time with our developmentally disabled. We continue to expand our services, and then we don't have the amount of money necessary to focus on those heavily dependent people. That is inappropriate, and I have fought against that the entire time.
Thank you. Candidate Krogh, please.
I believe that how we treat the weakest among us, the poorest, those who need the most help, is actually the test of who we are as a society. I don't agree with what Mr. Bies just said. I don't think that we are creating a culture of dependency when we help a disabled person. What we're doing is the right thing. And at every step of the way, when we look at the poor, when we look at the disabled, I find everybody in my life who I know wants to work. They want to contribute. They want to be part of the society in a really meaningful way. And it's our job to make sure that that happens. There's no culture of dependency. It's not out there. There are people. There are people like us. What we do to help them is a test of who we are.
Thank you. What is your view on making driving tests mandatory for everyone over 75? And candidate Krogh, we will start with you.
Aside from the age component of it, I would actually like to see us have driving tests recertified. I know that we lose skills, and I probably shouldn't say this. My daughter recently started reading through her driving guide, and I didn't know some of the answers. And so as we go forward, as we really think about what we want to do to create safety on our roads, yeah, I think that we should be recertifying everybody and making sure that we are actually safe drivers.
Thank you. Candidate Bies, please.
Well, I think I better speak very carefully, considering we got a wide spectrum of people here in this audience. But I think, as Krogh said, that we do need to take a look. But we also need to make sure people come with a wide variety of ability. And my grandparents, they were able to drive. And then there became a point where they said, we don't feel that we can do this. We feel that, with my health issues, and I think there has been voluntary people that have said, I am no longer fit to drive. Yeah, it's something I have to look at a little bit more.
Thank you. Would you please state and explain your position on Initiative 1185 that requires a 2/3 majority for tax and fee increases? We'll start with candidate Krogh, please.
We have the most regressive tax structure in this country. And I believe that the initiative, this 2/3 majority coming forward time and time again, is a reflection of the fact that our tax system isn't fair. Right now, the middle class and the poor in this state pay a much higher percentage of state taxes than the wealthy do. That's the real problem. I understand why people want this 2/3 majority. I understand why they voted for it again and again. But the problem is we have real issues in solving our budget crisis. We have real problems because some of those taxes are unfair, and some of them could be reduced. Some of them should probably be increased. But we have to have that flexibility to balance it. If we require a 2/3 majority for every single tax, all we're going to do is continue the inequity.
Thank you. Candidate Bies, please.
Thank you. This is going to be the 5th time that the voters of Washington State will have the opportunity to vote on this. The last time it passed overwhelmingly with over 60% of the vote. I support this, and one of the factors of the lawsuit that happened down in Seattle, where the judge threw it out and said this is unconstitutional, and it was on the grounds that, well, it's impossible to raise a tax. Well, that's not really true, because we were able to raise taxes. On your ballot, you're going to see 2 advisory votes. Those are 2 taxes that were raised or continued. And we were able to get that because we were able to get broad consensus that, yes, these are appropriate taxes to raise. And so we have proof that where it's appropriate, taxes will be raised. Where there's a broad level of support, we can raise those taxes where they're needed. And when we see a reason to raise them, as Republicans, we will, and we have.
Thank you. I have to compliment you. You both are doing a great job of staying within your allotted time. The next question. Do you support the charter school initiative? Why or why not? And we'll start with candidate Bies, please.
Thank you. I do support the initiative. However, I am optimistically cautious. As has been said before, it does throw a new mix. I support giving parents the option to choose. That said, there are factors that come into play. It's been said, well, we're just going to water down the system. However, these are public schools. They are public schools, and oftentimes they will be schools that we're going to close, that will then open up again. We say, well, there's not going to be enough funding. Well, these schools will continue to be funded the same way our education system is funded on a per student. We'll send the money continually down by the student. And sometimes people will say, well, they're just going to cherry pick the people that go into these schools. Well, that's not true either, because they will be under the same state mandates that say you cannot cherry pick. You must select anybody. If there becomes too many people in the system, then it will be appointed by lottery.
Thank you. Candidate Krogh, please.
I'm opposed. My daughter just came through the Bellingham school system, and she had a fantastic education. Not everybody gets that opportunity, and we have yet to fully fund education in this state. It is our paramount duty. It's been repeated again and again to make sure that we fully fund education. We have to commit to that first before we think about other ways to spend the money on experiments that don't work. 1 out of 6 of these charter schools performs better than the public schools. 2 out of 6 don't. That's a gamble that I, for one, am not willing to take with our children's education. And frankly, I agree with Mr. Overstreet on this one. I don't see the need to create a new bureaucracy in Olympia with less oversight, with appointment by governor, where we still raise taxes locally and we send it to Olympia, and then we don't have control over it coming back. We should keep control over our schools and keep control over our school funding.
Thank you. And tying in with the education theme, higher education public funding has decreased steadily for many years. Would you support increasing state funding of education beyond high school? Please give the reason for your position. Candidate Bies, we'll start with you.
Thank you. I do support increasing our funding for higher education. I stood in support of that over the last 2 years. I stood in opposition to the universities being allowed tuition setting authority because I felt that that did not serve the students best. What's happened under the current majority leadership down in Olympia is we've seen a continual decline from where it used to be about a 70-30 split. The state paid 70% of the higher education costs, and the rest, the 30%, was paid by the student. We've now seen that inverted. I would like to see us get to a 50-50 ratio. That means we have an investment in our students. That also means that our students have a good investment into their education. But we also have to look beyond that. There's certain degrees that we need as a state. There's certain industries that are lacking in employees. So whether we can look at doing a differential tuition rate or differential funding dependent on degree would be very beneficial, because it would allow us to fund the degrees that our businesses need to keep our economy moving.
Thank you. And candidate Krogh, please.
2 weeks ago, I moved my daughter, or helped move my daughter, into her dorm up at Western Washington University. And about a week later, we got her bill. That bill, over the course of 4 years, is just slightly less than the house that we bought that she was born in. It's a stunning amount of money that we are asking our students to pay for their public education and then drag that debt with them to an entry-level job. It's not right. One of the problems that we have is we talk about the costs of education, whether it's K through 12 or higher education. The truth is, education is an investment. Every dollar that we spend in education comes back to us manyfold in our society with people who, just like Mr. Bice said, have the skills that our businesses need, who have the ability to function in our society, who are good at what they do and have the imagination to understand what the future holds. And that's what we really need. We need to invest in our kids.
Thank you. And now we'll start on our last question of the evening. They're slightly different for the two of you. For Mr. Krogh, what legislation would you sponsor?
Ooh. Wow. It's kind of geeky, but one of the first things that I'd like to do is make sure that we actually have a fish consumption rate that is protective of the poor. That, to explain, we have talked a lot about environmental regulation. We've talked a lot about the burden that is imposed on us by regulation. We haven't talked a lot about the burden that is imposed on the poor and those among us who actually subsist at the margins of our society. Right now, we regulate cleanups, we regulate toxics to a standard that doesn't protect about a fifth of our society, people who actually subsist on fish and on shellfish. So one of the first things that I want to do is make sure, and this comes back to the equality, it comes back to the injustice question, is make sure that when we talk about cleanups, when we talk about toxics, that the poorest among us are actually protected, they can actually go fish and eat that fish and not be poisoned.
Thank you. And candidate Bice, what is the most important piece of legislation you've sponsored and had pass in the legislature?
Well, I've had 3 bills passed in the legislature, and I think the most important one is the one redefining or clarifying for the Department of Ecology what a whale truly is. A few years back, there was some Department of Ecology agents that were out on a farm here in Whatcom County, and this is what kind of was the impetus for this bill. And they were doing a soil sample, which is about a 12-inch long tube that you push into the soil, and it's about a 1 inch in diameter. Well, the guy said, well, you realize you have to get a permit for that, right? And the guy looks at him and is like, well, for taking a soil sample? And he's all, well, yeah, you're drilling a well. And they kind of looked at him and kind of laughed, and really, I'm drilling a well with this little pipe? Well, yeah. And so I was able to get that definition changed, so it was very clear that taking a soil sample is not drilling a well, and this saved our farmers a lot of hassle and millions of dollars statewide, because millions of these soil samples are taken every day or around our state. And so this was a big thing, it had a huge impact, and it started here locally.
Thank you. All right, now we'll have our closing statements. They are 1 minute each, and we will start with candidate Bice, please.
Well, thank you. It's been an honor and a privilege to serve you for the last 2 years, and I look forward to another 2 years. I've been endorsed by all the small city mayors, the mayors of Everson, the mayor of Nooksack, the mayor of Sumas, the mayor of Linden, the mayor of Blaine, and the mayor of Ferndale. And it's been an honor to receive their endorsement because we all respect their leadership. I will continue to fight hard for you guys and for everybody in Whatcom County and also Washington State, because we are a diverse community and we are a diverse state. I look forward to the opportunity to continue the work that I've done, the work to make our lives better, to make our lives easier. And oftentimes government can get in the way of that, and oftentimes government can help in that. And I look forward to working to come up with ideas that craft the best of the both worlds, of where government can do best and where the private sector can do the best. So thank you for your support. I look forward to it. Please vote this November. If you haven't thought about it, do it. Make sure you're registered. I think the deadline for registration is tomorrow if you're going to register by mail. So I appreciate your vote. Thank you.
Thank you. And candidate Krogh, 1 minute, please.
My name is Matt Krogh. I feel honored to be here, and I explained at the beginning, I'm running because I love this place. I'm a father, I'm a husband, I'm a business owner. I work to protect clean water. I want to continue doing that and fighting for all of you. But one of the things that has surprised me along the way is just the incredible diversity of people that we get to meet on the campaign trail, and I'm sure this is true for every candidate, but when you get out there, you can actually talk to people and listen and hear what the problems are and hear ideas about what the solutions are. And that's a characteristic that I take with me every day, and it's something that I will take to Olympia for you, because I know that I don't understand everything that everybody is going through. I know that I have to listen, and that's something I'm absolutely committed to doing and doing for you.
Thank you. And everyone, please join me in thanking the candidates tonight. On behalf of the League of Women Voters of Bellingham, Whatcom County, and the City of Bellingham, I want to thank the candidates for running and for being with us here this evening. We also extend a big thank you to BTV 10 for airing this forum on Comcast Channel 10 and on the city's website. You may find the rebroadcast schedule at cob.org. Links to the video on-demand broadcasts, as well as other great election information, are available on our website at lwv.bellinghamwhatcom.org. We'd like to thank the Bellingham Herald for their participation in this project as our media partner. The coverage of the forums has been excellent. Thank you to the Forum Committee for all of your hard work, and thank all of you for being such an attentive audience and asking such great questions. Remember to vote by November 6th and encourage your family, friends, and neighbors to vote also. Good night.
I belong to a lot of organizations, but the League I really like because they promote civil discussion.
They're not knee-jerk decisions. It's big picture thinking in the League. Actually having conversations about issues where they don't necessarily agree.
I think my vote, personally, my individual vote is worth far less than the impact that I have on others who come to me and we discuss the issues and really engage in a meaningful fashion.
They broaden their perspective so that they're able to see more eye to eye and come to agreement on points of values.
I can impact so many more people. I can impact the community. And I think it's a chance for young people to see themselves as part of their generation as a community who's going to be defining the world that they're going to be living in.
The results of elections are what determines what goes on in our country, in our state, in our local government. It's the only way we have to really voice what it is we want from our government.